If you throw your coffee grounds into the trash every morning, you may be throwing away one of the simplest things that could help your tomatoes and cucumbers grow stronger and produce more. I used to do exactly the same thing because I thought coffee grounds were nothing more than kitchen waste, and I never imagined they could become part of my garden. Looking back now, I realize I wasted years, and I probably spent money on products I never really needed. The funny thing is that many experienced gardeners quietly save every handful of coffee grounds, while the rest of us keep filling the garbage bin. I was lucky enough to learn this habit from an older neighbor many years ago, and ever since then I have never looked at my morning coffee the same way again. I am not saying coffee grounds are some kind of miracle because they are not. A healthy garden still needs good soil, regular watering, and patience. But I can honestly tell you that using coffee grounds the right way has helped me grow healthier. Cucumber vines, stronger tomato plants, and better harvests without spending extra money. The biggest mistake most people make is using them the wrong way or throwing them away before they even understand what they have. I have seen gardeners spread thick, wet layers around plants and later wonder why nothing improved. I have also seen people believe every tip they find on the internet without testing it for themselves. That is exactly why I wanted to share what has worked in my own garden year after year. Everything I will show you comes from simple experience and from small lessons that were passed from one gardener to another long before expensive garden products filled store shelves. Over the next few minutes, I will walk you through 5 practical ways I use coffee grounds around cucumbers and tomatoes. Some methods help improve the soil. Some help keep the garden cleaner and healthier. One method surprised even me because I almost ignored it the first time someone showed it to me. Most people never try these simple ideas because they seem too ordinary to make a difference. That is often how the best garden habits are forgotten. Stay with me, because before we finish, I want to show you the small mistake that almost everyone makes with coffee grounds, and avoiding that one mistake can make a much bigger difference than using coffee grounds at all. When I first started saving coffee grounds, I made the same mistake that many people still make today. I thought the more I used, the better the results would be. So I carried a fresh bucket into the garden after breakfast and spread thick wet piles around my cucumber plants because it seemed like a good idea at the time. A few weeks later, the soil looked heavy, the surface became hard after rain, and the plants certainly were not thanking me for my effort. That was the day my older neighbor smiled and told me I was wasting something useful by using too much of it. He said coffee grounds should never become a heavy blanket over the soil because plants need air just as much as they need water. That simple conversation changed the way I gardened. Since then, I have always treated coffee grounds as a helpful ingredient instead of a magic cure. That is an important difference because many people expect one free material to solve every garden problem. Nature simply does not work that way. Good harvests come from many small habits that work together. Coffee grounds become valuable when they support healthy soil instead of trying to replace it. One of the first things I learned was to let the used coffee grounds dry before taking them outside. It only takes a little time and it prevents them from sticking together into a wet layer that blocks air from reaching the soil. I usually spread them on an old tray or a piece of newspaper, and by the next day they are ready to use. It costs nothing and it takes almost no effort, but very few people bother to do it. That small step alone can make a surprising difference. Another thing I noticed over the years is that my compost pile became richer whenever I added small amounts of dried coffee grounds, together with dry leaves, grass clippings, and kitchen scraps. The compost stayed active, and after a while it turned into dark, crumbly material that every tomato and cucumber plant seemed to enjoy. I am convinced that patience is worth much more than buying another expensive bag from the garden center. And now I want to show you the first method I use directly in the garden, because this is where most people finally begin to see why I never throw coffee grounds away anymore. The first way I use coffee grounds is also the simplest, and it is probably the one that has given me the most consistent results over the years. I never dump a large pile around the base of my tomatoes or cucumbers because that is where many people go wrong. Instead, I take just a small handful of completely dry coffee grounds and mix them gently into the top inch of soil a few inches away from the stem. It takes less than a minute for each plant, and I usually do it every few weeks during the growing season. I like this method because the soil stays loose and easy to water, and I never see that hard crust that formed when I used coffee grounds the wrong way years ago. An old gardener once told me that the soil should always be able to breathe, and I have remembered those words ever since. When I mix the grounds lightly into the surface, they slowly become part of the soil instead of sitting on top like a wet blanket. Earthworms seem to enjoy working through that area, and whenever I gently move the soil aside, I often find more worm activity than before. That is always a good sign because healthy soil is full of life even when we cannot see most of it. I also noticed that my cucumber plants seemed to stay more vigorous through the warm part of summer, and my tomatoes developed stronger growth without needing complicated feeding schedules. I am careful not to expect instant results because gardening has taught me that the best changes happen slowly. Every week the plants look almost the same, and then one morning you realize they are taller, greener, and carrying more flowers than you expected. That is one of my favorite moments in the garden. Most people give up too quickly because they are looking for something dramatic after only a few days. This old habit rewards patience instead. There is another detail that many gardeners overlook, and I almost ignored it myself until someone explained why it matters. The amount you use is far more important than using it often. A little can help, but too much can work against you. In the next part, I want to show you another simple way I use coffee grounds that costs absolutely nothing, and has become one of my favorite tricks for growing healthy cucumbers all season long. Another habit that has stayed with me for years is using coffee grounds as part of a simple homemade mulch mixture. I never use coffee grounds by themselves because I learned long ago that balance is always better than excess. I mix one small handful of dry coffee grounds with dry leaves, a little grass that has already dried out, and sometimes a bit of shredded straw if I have it nearby. Then I spread this light mixture around my cucumber and tomato plants without touching the stems. It creates a thin layer that helps the soil hold moisture a little longer during warm days while still allowing air to move through. That may not sound exciting, but after many summers I have learned that the smallest improvements often bring the biggest rewards. During hot weather, I noticed that the soil under this light mulch stayed cooler and did not dry out as quickly. That meant I spent less time carrying watering cans around the garden, and my plants looked less stressed during long, sunny afternoons. Saving time and water is something I appreciate much more now than I did when I was younger. Most people think they need expensive materials to mulch a garden, but many of the best things are already around the house if you know how to combine them. An older friend once laughed when he saw me buying bags of decorative mulch years ago. He pointed to a pile of fallen leaves and asked why I wanted to pay for something that nature gives away every autumn. I never forgot that lesson. Since then, I have tried to waste as little as possible because every season teaches me that simple habits often work just as well as costly products. One thing I always avoid is placing fresh, wet coffee grounds directly against the stem of a tomato or cucumber plant. That area should stay open and dry because good air movement helps keep the base of the plant healthy. It is a small detail that many gardeners overlook, and later they wonder why their plants struggle, even though they believe they are doing everything right. Sometimes success comes from avoiding one simple mistake instead of adding another product. There is still another way I use coffee grounds that surprised several friends when they saw the results. It is probably the easiest method of all. Yet very few gardeners seem to talk about it anymore. And that is exactly where we are going next. One of my favorite ways to use coffee grounds does not even happen directly in the garden. It starts in a simple bucket standing behind my shed where I collect small amounts of kitchen scraps every few days. I always add vegetable peelings, dry leaves, a little grass, and from time to time a handful of dry coffee grounds. I never overload the pile because I learned that compost works best when every ingredient has its place. After several weeks, I begin to notice the pile changing. The rough pieces slowly disappear, and what was once ordinary kitchen waste turns into dark, loose compost with a fresh, earthy smell. Every spring, I spread that finished compost around my tomatoes and cucumbers and gently work it into the top layer of soil. I cannot say that coffee grounds alone create the difference because they are only one part of the process. but together with everything else, they help produce compost that my garden seems to love year after year. I still remember the first season when I compared two cucumber beds. One received ordinary soil while the other received compost that included coffee grounds and other natural materials collected through the winter. By the middle of summer, the second bed looked fuller and healthier, and harvesting became part of my morning routine instead of something I only did once in a while. That experience convinced me that nothing valuable should leave the kitchen before I ask myself whether it belongs in the compost instead. Many people think composting is difficult, but it really is one of the simplest habits a gardener can develop. Nature does most of the work while we simply provide the ingredients. I also like the feeling that almost nothing goes to waste because every cup of coffee eventually gives something back to the garden. There is a quiet satisfaction in that which is hard to explain until you experience it yourself. I often tell friends that growing vegetables is not only about harvesting tomatoes and cucumbers. It is also about learning to see value where other people only see rubbish. Still, there is one more way I use coffee grounds that surprised even my family when they first saw me doing it. At first it looked too simple to matter, but after repeating it for several seasons, I would not want to grow cucumbers without it. And that final method is the one I want to share with you next on. The fifth, and probably the easiest way I use coffee grounds is as a gentle liquid feed that costs almost nothing to make. I never try to prepare anything complicated because over the years I have learned that simple methods are usually the ones I keep using. I place a small handful of used coffee grounds into a bucket of water and leave it to sit for about a day. The water becomes lightly colored and that is all I need. I do not expect miracles from it, and I never pour it on every day. I simply use it from time to time to water the soil around my cucumber and tomato plants, keeping the liquid a few inches away from the stems. I have found that this gentle approach works much better than trying to force quick growth. Gardening has taught me that plants respond best to steady care instead of constant changes. One week they may seem quiet, and then suddenly they begin producing fresh flowers and healthy new leaves. Those are the moments that remind me why I enjoy spending time in the garden. I also pay close attention to the plants themselves because they always tell me more than any package or advertisement ever could. If the leaves look healthy and the plants continue growing well, I simply stay with the same routine. If something looks wrong, I do not immediately add more coffee grounds because I know every problem has its own cause. Too many gardeners believe that adding more of something will always fix the situation, but experience has shown me that patience and observation solve more problems than rushing from one product to another. My garden has become much easier to manage since I stopped chasing quick results. I use what I already have, I waste less, I spend less money. Most importantly, I enjoy the process far more than I did years ago. Friends sometimes ask me why my tomatoes and cucumbers seem so dependable every season, and I always smile because there is no single secret. It is simply a collection of small habits repeated again and again until they become part of everyday life. Coffee grounds are one of those habits that quietly fit into the routine without creating extra work. In the final part, I want to share what this simple change has really meant to me over the years and why I believe the best gardening lessons are often the ones our parents and grandparents practiced without ever calling them secrets. When I look back at all the years I have spent in the garden, I realize that the biggest improvements did not come from expensive fertilizers or complicated methods. They came from paying attention to simple things that many people ignore. Saving coffee grounds became one of those small habits that slowly changed the way I looked at gardening. Every morning I no longer see waste. I see something that can become healthier soil, better compost, or a gentle boost for my tomatoes and cucumbers. None of these methods take much time and none of them require special tools. That is probably why I still use them after all these years. They fit naturally into everyday life and they remind me that a good garden is built one small step at a time. I have learned that the happiest gardeners are not always the ones who spend the most money. They are usually the ones who notice small opportunities and make good use of what they already have. That is a lesson worth remembering not only in the garden, but in everyday life as well. If you decide to try these methods, do not expect everything to change overnight. Give your soil time to improve and give your plants the steady care they need. Watch them closely because they will tell you what works better than any advertisement ever will. Every season teaches something new, and even after all these years, I still discover little details that make gardening more enjoyable. That is one reason I never get tired of growing my own food. There is always another lesson waiting just around the corner. If there is one thing I hope you remember after watching this, it is that simple habits often become the strongest foundations for a successful garden. Before you throw away your next batch of coffee grounds, think about what they could become instead. They might help feed your compost, protect your soil, hold moisture a little longer, or quietly support healthier cucumber vines and stronger tomato plants. Sometimes the best garden secret is not something you buy. It is something that has been sitting in your kitchen all along, waiting for someone to give it a second purpose. In my next video, I want to share another forgotten gardening habit that helped me harvest more while spending even less money, and I think it may surprise you just as much as this one did.